Okay, so our presentation today is zoning regulations for poultry, working with your local authorities. And the presenter today is Dr. Anthony Pescatore, also goes by Tony, from the University of Kentucky. All yours, Tony. I will be on mute.
All right. As we talk today, we're going to talk about regulations in regards to poultry. As poultry becomes more popular, everything from hobbies to small farming to pets, there becomes a need to reevaluate existing regulations as well as creating new regulations. So we're going to talk today about zoning regulations and how you can work with your local authorities and how regulations get in place. So the first question is, why do you want zoning regulations? Why is there such a thing as zoning regulations? And the reason for it is that zoning regulations are in place in order to protect property owners so that their property retains its value. It's also to protect property owners from behaviors that they don't want to be exposed to. It's not only deals with property owners, it also is in place to protect residents. So there are types of zoning regulations that protect all the people in the area. An example would be requiring a fence around a swimming pool. It's not only about property owners, it's about all residents that could be exposed to that hazard. Zoning regulations also exist to eliminate conflicts. As we get people on top, in close proximity to others, there's always the potential for conflicts developing about what is proper and what is not proper use of properties or behaviors. Another reason we have zoning is to minimize the impact of whatever behavior we are creating regulations for. We want to make sure that things are allowed, but we want to make sure we minimize the impact that is occurring because of that activity. And then in the last place is public safety. What are the zoning regulations are in place because of public safety? So that's another one. So what we're really looking at when you talk about zoning regulations, they're there for one of 5 reasons: to protect property owners, protect residents, eliminate conflicts, minimize impact, and for public safety. So when we start talking about regulations, the first thing that I always ask people to do is find out what regulations are already in existence, is to find out what is in place and that we don't duplicate something as we try to create new regulations. So the places to look for existing regulations include levels of the federal government. We need to look at state government. Many municipalities will have regulations in regards to animals and the types that you can have. And more importantly, with many of the subdivisions and homeowners association, there may be requirements already in deed restrictions or as part of a homeowner association or a subdivision. So when you start talking about developing regulations, it's important to understand that there may be existing federal regulations in place and that they are part of what we're trying to deal with. There's also state regulations in regards to a lot of the water quality and environmental issues. And then municipalities may have general things as well. And municipalities includes counties as well as city governments. And again, the homeowners associations. So when we start talking about how you work with local individuals, we need local authorities and to develop regulations. One of the things we need to start thinking about is, what are you protecting the citizens from? Why do you want the zoning regulations? What are you protecting people from? And there could be many different things. Examples of things you could be protecting citizens from are public health, the fact that there might be a concern about the production of birds in an area or things of that nature. There could be things about protecting people from unnecessary or nuisance noise complaints. We always have the fear if we have a large population of any animals, you might have odor. There might be just general nuisance complaints that are things such as the appearance of the property or the location of the property or the movement of people in and out of an area. Aesthetics. What is the view that people have of the property? And then we also have to worry about protecting citizens from discharges. And these discharges can be water discharge with runoff, or it could be air discharges from air coming from it. So all those things are things that you might want to consider when you're considering local regulations about what you're trying to protect the citizens from. And that's the core of a zoning regulation. So as we move into something like this idea, there are some really rules that have to be abided by to be an effective and to develop regulations, and these rules need to be followed. The first rule is honesty. All parties need to come to the table and be honest about the reason they're there and what their goals are. There cannot be any hidden agendas and things like that. Honesty is the best policy in this. Whether you're a homeowner or whether you're a government official, honesty is the best thing we're dealing with. When you start coming into the idea of developing regulations, one of the things you need to come to this activity with no biases. You need to have an open mind. You don't have to prejudge situations. You need to have no biases, and that kind of goes along with the honesty. Being honest about it, coming in with a clear mind or an open mind is very important. The third thing on the list is communications. When we start developing regulations, communication is very important for all parties involved. If we're having problems or we're thinking about having problems, we need to open lines of communications. We may not like the people we're dealing with, but at the same time, we still must communicate with them. The fourth thing is dealing in facts. That's the next thing on the list. What is the actual facts of a situation? We don't need to sensationalize things. We need just to deal in what we know are facts. We don't need to do hearsay. We don't need to do sensationalism. We need to present facts in a logical order. No hidden agendas. That's a very important one, and that's probably the hardest one on the list, because people do come to such debates with a hidden agenda. There may be people that are for something or against something because they have some plans for the property or they have some idea of what their communications is. I always remember dealing with a town in Tennessee. They really thought they were going to be the next Branson, and they were against any type of developments in their area because they were waiting for the next big thing. So there's hidden agendas behind a lot of things, but we need to make sure we eliminate those. The next one is conflict of interest. No conflicts of interest. If you have a personal interest in something, it's very important that it becomes upfront. You don't want to later on find out that there's somebody else that you're dealing with, find out that you have a conflict of interest. An example would be you're a promoter of this and you know something good is going to happen for your property if it passes. And that goes along with personal gain. When you start dealing regulations, you need to not have that conflict of interest that results in personal gain. So all these things, when you sit down and start thinking about regulations, have to be what the parties involved are. They have to be honest. They have to bring no biases to the table. They have to have a willingness to communicate. They need to deal in facts. They need to not have any hidden agendas everything should be on the table and should be transparent. And if there's conflicts of interest or the ability for personal gains, that needs to be disclosed to all people that are in this regulation development. So if you're starting out and you want to do some zoning, you need to know what you want to accomplish before you start the process. Are you trying to protect something, or are you trying to allow something? What is your ultimate goal? What when the process is over, what results would make you happy? And when you're dealing with regulations and trying to put them in place, there is a group that's always trying to put regulations in to protect, such as a historic piece of property, or to allow a use that has not been done before. An example would be allowing home canning for profit. Those type of things are examples of being able to protect or allow. When you start getting into regulations, the first thing you need to know is the process. Every municipality, every homeowners association, every state, every federal government has a process for developing regulations. And you need to understand that process as you move forward. First of all, you need to understand where the process starts. Is it at the county attorney's office? Is it at the mayor's office? Is it at the city council? Is it at the homeowners association? Is it at a third party that's been contracted by them? Where does the process start? In addition to that, you need to know not only how the process starts, how the process goes forward. You have to understand, are there requirements for something of a public hearing? Or are there readings of any regulation that has to be followed? And if so, how many of the public hearings and how many of the readings have to be done? An example of public hearings at some stages, there will not be public hearings unless someone petitions to have a public hearing. So those are things that you have to understand in that process as you begin this system. You need to know who authors the regulation. Is it the county attorney? Is it a third party? Is it something a city council aide does? Is it the mayor's office? Who authors the regulation and who has final say what's included? And all of it, in any type of regulation, there is a steps in place for approval of a process. So it would be, the first example would be you would have to have a public notice of the desire to produce regulation. Then you'd have to have public notice that there's going to be a public hearing on it. It may require that there's two public hearings, or it could be simply an official reading of the regulation at a council meeting or at a homeowners association meeting. All those things have to be in place, and you have to understand it so that you don't miss steps and you understand the time frame you're working in it. Sometimes when they have multiple readings of a bill, there has to be 2 or 3 weeks between those readings. Know the process. More importantly, you need to know who are the official decision makers. Is it the mayor that makes the decision? Is it the president of the homeowners association? Is it the zoning and planning board? Is it the city council? Who are the official decision makers that have the final say on whether something is a regulation or not? So that's very important to know the official people involved in this process. More importantly, and the harder thing, is to know the unofficial influencers. Who are the people that have the ear of the official decision makers? Who are the people that are going to decide what we do? what is going to be proper or not. Every town, every community has of unofficial influencers. And when you start developing regulations, there's two groups of people involved in any decision. There are going to be people that are advocates, and there are going to be people that are adversaries. And as you move forward in making zoning regulations, you need to know who the people are that are your advocates. Who are the people that are going to be the ones that say, this is a good idea, or encourage you to go forward. At the same time, you also need to know your adversaries. Who are the ones that you're going to either have to convince or have to answer their questions? So in any community, these are the four groups of people you really need to understand. The official decision makers, the unofficial influencers, the advocates, and the adversaries as you move this process forward. Anytime you deal with regulations, you have to understand there's always a political aspect to a regulation. And when a politician or a person in office agrees to be involved in developing regulations, they're looking at the certain things are important to them. One is that there is support of the people in the community for that regulation. They are people that depend on public relations, so they want support. They want broad-based support. So they understand that this is not a small group of people that are doing it. And that leads into the other thing. They view votes as their commodity. How are you bringing votes to them, or are this is going to cost votes, or are you actually able to vote for the person? That would happen a lot of times with city councils where you have many council districts. If you're trying to influence a councilman and you're not live in their districts, you need to recruit somebody else that is a voter for them. The next thing is that all political figures have a public image, and they do not want to be embarrassed in the public eye. That image is very important for them. So it's very important that you understand that they're dealing in image in regards to themselves as well as their voters. And you need to make sure that you do not offend them in public, do not embarrass them in public, or do anything to be detrimental to their image. And I've also found that in most political people at the local levels have a civic pride. They're in this to do civic things. So if it's good for the community, they take pride in it. What does that aspect of what you're proposing have in regard to civic pride? So remember, there's always political aspects, even when it's not political, because there are political figures involved. So as we're going to be building these regulations, here's some first steps that you need to do. Do your homework. Understand what you plan on doing. Go and find reliable sources of individuals, or if you can't do that, find reliable source of information, or know where there are resources. So that if someone asks about a question, or if a person that is an advocate for you wants more information, where can you have it? And pick reliable sources so that they are can be viewed as accurate. Whenever you start doing these things, and it involves the government, meet with the government officials privately. You don't need to have public debate or bring things into the public's eye before the government officials have time to discuss it with you. But it's a good thing to do it in private, discuss the issues, and have them ask the questions that they think they need information on, and provide that source of information to them. It's always better to do it privately because they are less likely to answer questions or show that they're ignorant on a subject in public. Do this, do it in a very cordial way. Do not take a lot of their time. And when you make the appointment, just make sure they understand what's involved. Don't make an appointment to discuss something without telling the government officials exactly what you're going to tell them, so they're not caught off guard. As you begin any of these type of things, be prepared to compromise. You might think you have the best regulation ever written, but be prepared to compromise. You might have to give up on some points to get others. And whenever you start doing this and involves a public hearing or a readings, and you have questions and answers or public comment, these things can become personal. Don't make it personal. Don't attack an adversary by bringing up personal things. You don't attack somebody personally that says that somebody's opposed to your regulation for poultry. Don't bring up that they have a car on blocks in their driveway. Don't make it personal. Nothing is personal in this. It's all about government regulation. The next rule is don't reinvent the wheel. If there are existing regs somewhere, do not be afraid to adopt the wording and the concepts from those regulations. You don't have to start with a clean piece of paper. Do your homework. If there are existing regs you like, adopt them. You can plagiarize. No one's going to complain that you plagiarized a good bill. If there's parts of something that you see that are not good or that you don't want to adopt, don't do it. Just figure out what you want, and then also as you can add to it. But don't reinvent the wheel. Look for existing regulations. So we move into what should a good regulation cover. The first one is containment. Any animal, including poultry, should be under the control of the owner and contained to your property. And that's simple. That is what we could abide by dogs. This is what we should abide by with poultry. This is one of those things that I still don't understand why cats are allowed to roam from property to property, but that's just historical. Why do you want containment? One is we want to prevent feral populations. If birds are getting out or any animals getting out, we don't want them to become feral because they are become strays or abandoned. An example would be the wild hog situation in many states. We don't want the feral populations are not something we want. The other thing is a lot of times when you have a population of birds that go off farm or go off property, they can go into someone else's flower beds and graze, or they can go in and tear up flower beds, or they can bother other people's pets and things of that nature. Property damage is a real thing, and you're responsible if your animals do damage to someone else's property. And that includes if they go there and they decide to use their deposit stuff all over a person's property. That's property damage as well. The other thing is vehicle accidents. If you have animals running wild or running loose and they run out in the street and someone brakes very hard to keep from hitting those animals and someone hits their vehicle, you probably be at fault for having your birds out there or loose on the property. And then you also have to be cognizant. Some of the people in the world have a fear of birds, and if birds are roaming or chase after someone, that could initiate their fear of birds. So, if in a good regulation, we're going to talk confinement, whether it's somewhere under the control and contained to your property. It doesn't have to be the fact that it's in a shelter or in a pen, but you need to make sure it's on your property. What should a regulation count? Noise is very important. How much noise is tolerable and when is the question you and your community needs to answer. Is an occasional crowing of a bird tolerable? Is the crowing of 300 birds not tolerable? And when was it heard? Is it an all-day thing? Is it something that occurs throughout the night because there are lights on? What is tolerable for the community? Are you going to require that there are no crowing birds? And if there is this thing of a noise complaint, who is responsible for enforcement of a noise complaint? And anytime you have birds that are causing a disturbance, whether it's noise or any other thing we're going to discuss today, there is the threat of a loss of use livestock, of lawsuits that can be brought to you in civil court saying, I can't use this. Example would be if you have a lot of chickens and they're crowing and their child cannot sleep during the day. That may be a loss of use of their nursery and things of that nature. Or if they're having a barbecue and the chickens are crowing all the time. Those are types of things that loss of use can be. Another thing that the regulation should cover is the location of a building or a coop. You need to start thinking about the distance those buildings or shed or coop is from an occupied building. I like to use the word occupied building as opposed to a house or a residence, because that involves stores, it involves offices, things of that nature. So an occupied business, what is the distance you need to be from an occupied building? At the same time, we need to take into consideration the distance to a property line. How far should you be away? And where on the property are you building a coop and or building? We're talking about sight lines, or we're talking about visibility from the street. Are we going to put something that's visible from the street, or does it have to be screened or not visible from the street? And as we get into some communities with small lot sizes, this becomes a real issue of location. Because in some of our community here in Lexington, we have places where they have a 40 by 100 lot. So there's less options for them to place a building or a coop, and then there is for someone that has a half-acre lot or a 5-acre lot. So those are things to take into consideration, is the lot size as well. And in many cases, there are existing regulations for outbuildings or sheds. In some communities, these may not be allowed at all. They might not even allow playhouses for children. So how would you expect them to make a regulation for a building of a coop or a structure to house chickens? So understand that there is some things to dealing about where you put it on the property. And the way to minimize that is to put it away from property lines and to put it towards the back of your property. Take into consideration your neighbors in regards to sight lines and your neighborhood in regards to sight lines. What should regulations cover? The number and the kinds of birds allowed. That should be addressed in any time you start making regulation. What is the correct number? That is a question that communities work with all the time. Is 6 too many? Is 10 too many? Is 100 too many? What is the correct number? And that's got to be decided on the local level. And there may be existing laws in place that dictate what the correct number is. An example here in Kentucky, chicks have to be purchased in minimum groups of 6. So a minimum group of number of birds would be probably 6. And then we have to look at, when we talk about number of birds, are we talking about pets? Are we talking about hobby flocks? Are we talking a business? What are we talking about in regards to allowing with the regulations? That helps you determine what is the correct number. More importantly, we talk about poultry regulations. People think it's chickens, but it's not just chickens. There are other species involved, and are all the other species going to be treated the same? Are we going to treat turkeys at the same numbers that we do bantam hens? Are we going to treat peafowl the same, or guinea fowl the same? Or how are you going to treat all species? We're just not going to make a law in regards to birds. We're going to make a law regards to those species. What should be covered by a regulation? Poultry health, public health and safety. Most municipalities get their regulation authority from the need to protect public health and public safety. That's where they get their power to regulate activities. That's where they get their authority from. So when they start talking about regulations, many times you will see it's something that says in the interest of protecting public health, or in the interest of protecting public safety. They have to start regulations with those type of things, ordinances with those types of language, because that's where they get their authority from. So what are the issues? You have to ask yourself, what are public health issues? Are we in close confinement? Are we dealing with situations where there's a public health issue? Public safety issues. Are there issues regarding that? We have to look at, when we talk about that, air movement away from the birds and discharges of air. How is it going with existing properties or occupied buildings? We also have the ability to have water runoff from structures and pens. How do we control that? Are we putting our pens on slope soils, and that is causing a flushing of the droppings into the water runoff? And anytime we have animals like chickens that require feed, we have to have an active rodent control program in place. And the same goes with insects and insect vectors. What are our methods for controlling? In some places where you have West Nile disease, chickens can be a carrier of that. How do we address that in regards to mosquitoes and things of that nature, and standing water bodies? So public health is really where the municipalities get their authority from. We have to spend time researching what the public health issues are, if there are any. What are the public safety issues? How are those factual? And then all the things that go with housing chickens or poultry we have to deal with, such as the air, such as water runoff, the rodents, and the insects. What should a regulation? Anytime we write regulations, one of the things that comes up is the question of, will a permit be required? Do you have to have a permit to have chickens in this area? That becomes an issue. Because once you say a permit is required, then you have to start asking and answering specific questions. The first thing that is, who will issue a permit? Is it going to be building code? Is it a county attorney's office? Is it the mayor's office? Who issues the permit? Is it animal control? All those things take into effect. Who issues the permit? More importantly, if there is a permitting process, who will enforce the permit? And if there is a permit, will there be inspections? And who will be doing those inspections? And anytime we have a permit involved, more than likely there will be a fee involved. What is a reasonable fee, and will there be a fee at all? And anytime we have a system that requires a permit to be required, there has to be an appeals process to deal with permits that are turned down. So if you're turned down for a permit, what is the appeal process? So all those things, if they require a permit, is going to be necessary. How we issue the permit, how we enforce the permit, the fee involved, and appeals process along the way. Again, what should regulations cover? The first one is, another one is waste management. Birds are going to deposit materials. How are we going to handle it? Is composting allowed? Or is it even go so far as being required that poultry waste is having to be compost before it can be spread on your gardens or disposed of? Can waste be stored on property? Can you have a pile of droppings stored on your property? Can waste be deposited in normal trash receptacles and go out with the normal trash collection? Those are questions that you have to ask your local authorities and deal with in regards to a poultry zoning requirement. Coupled with that is dead animal disposal. If you have a regulation that allows animals, what do we do with dead animals? Is burial allowed on your property? Is composting of dead animals allowed on your properties? Can dead birds be placed in normal trash receptacles? An example is, are they allowed to be placed in trash if they're double bagged, tied shut, and placed in the normal trash? So dead birds and waste have to be addressed on how you deal with it. This doesn't have to be in the formal regulation that allows it, but it can be also on some ordinance or some question and answers that the community comes up with. Anytime you deal with regulations, you also have to know who will investigate a nuisance complaint. If you're permitting and allowing things to occur on a property, who is in charge of investigating if there is a problem? Is it going to be animal control? Is it going to be building control, code enforcement? Is it going to be law enforcement? Is it going to be the EPA of the local municipality? Or will it go straight to a legal aspect and have assist a requirement to stop immediately? Along with that, if you're doing nuisance complaints, are there going to be penalties and fines? Are they going to be similar to what's in the other parts of your zoning regulations in that community? And if there are penalties and fines, where are they paid and who gets them and what are they used for? You also need to always think about procedures against bad actors. Everyone thinks they're doing things well. There are populations of bad actors. They may not have the same sanitation contingencies. They may be animal hoarders. It could be a lot of things that occur. There's got to be procedures in the government that allows the government to deal with bad actors. Penalties and fines and it could be a loss of use as part of that bad actors. And that brings up the next one, is that when you start dealing with ordinances and you deal with penalties and fines, you're also dealing with two populations of people. You could be dealing with renters, you could be dealing with property owners. Property owners you have more clout with because you can put fines or liens on the owners of property. But in renters, how are you going to enforce a penalty or fine if they're a mobile population are going to move within the month? And another thing that comes into this when we start dealing with it, the communities might want to address the fact that if the operation gets big enough, say someone's selling eggs from 50 hens on a piece of property, and they're selling to a grocery store or they're selling to something, have we crossed the line into a business operations? Many communities have regulations in place about what constitutes a home business and what's allowed as home businesses. So when you go and change regulations, you might want to look at that home business regulations as well. So, in summary, good regulations have certain things in common. They serve a purpose, they allow the activities to occur, they protect the resources that need to be protected, or the people or property that needs to be protected. And more importantly, they're enforceable, so that we're dealing with not only zoning laws, but we're dealing with laws that can be enforced. With that, I'll stop the presentation.